Hey guys, in this video I'm just going to show you how to go about painting a sunset. Start from the beginning process all the way to the finish, what colors to use, some of the key things to focus on, and some helpful tips throughout the painting process that you want to keep in mind. So hopefully you find this informative, and let's go ahead and show the colors on the screen so you know my palette, and we'll go ahead and get started. So first thing you want to notice that I toned my canvas using burnt sienna. Have a nice clean wash over the surface, even tone. So that's the key thing you're looking for here, is just a flat tone, about a mid-tone. And then you're going to begin the drawing process using the same color that you toned the canvas with. So in this case it would be burnt sienna. I want to use just a little bit on my brush to plot out a few of the key lines that we're looking for. So we're going to establish the background, foreground, simplifying any curvature that I see into a series of angles. Cutting across, we have the division here, foreground, background, and in this scene we're going to have some clouds that appear right along the top third of the canvas. So I just want to draw a line to indicate the separation between the cloud and sky area. And remember, you're not focusing on any detail at this point, you just want to get the big shapes, key structures. Sun will be about here, so I just want to very lightly draw a circle to indicate the placement of where the strongest light will be coming from, right about here on this left third of the page. We get the ocean cutting across this way. Want to make sure that this line is staying straight the whole way through. So comparing this side, the length from this side, making sure those are even. We're going to have a figure appearing right here. So just drawing a simple shape can do a silhouette to indicate the figure. Doesn't have to be anything detailed, just simple abstract shape like that. Then on the foreground, we just want to capture some of the separations that I'm seeing. This is going to be very subtle when we get to the painting aspect, but nonetheless I want to have some of the structure that is going on in the foreground identified to make it easier when I get into the colors. We have some foliage happening right down here, which I can just loosely apply with some darker value. There's a slight pathway which I drew out with this curved line. And then what I want to indicate here is that there's the glow of the sun reflecting on the surface all through this area. So I'm going to keep that in mind, moving on to the colors, that this orange light of the sun is going to be appearing in a lot of this area. And this is pretty much all the main shapes that I need. There's a very slight division here of a break in the clouds, which I can do with a simple line. But otherwise, is pretty much what I'm looking for in terms of an underpainting. So you can see big shapes, no detail yet, and at this point I'm ready to go ahead and start blocking in my colors. Go ahead and wipe off my brush, and we're going to start with the sky color. There's a lot of different color changes that are going on in the sky, especially with the sunset, but you just want to identify what the main base color is going to be. In this case, what I'm going to be mixing is a little bit of, I'm going to test this color out. That looks about right. And just scumble it across the surface of the sky. If it helps, you could use a little bit of linseed oil to get the paint to flow better, but keep in mind that you want your lighter colors to be a little bit thicker consistency than your darker colors. This would still count as a lighter color, so I don't want to thin it out too much. This will appear all through the top part of the sky, and then as I go down I'm going to add more white to this section as it gets closer to the cloud to get more of a gradation going on. You can see I'm alternating my brush strokes, providing more movement. You don't want it to look too stagnant, so alternating the brushwork can help provide more interest in the painting. I want to leave some of those marks showing. So there's the top base color, and then moving down, I'm going to add a bit more titanium white. So you can see a lighter version of this color, and I'm going to block it in throughout this section right before we have the clouds. I want it to blend nicely against the color that's above it, so I'm not afraid to just have it bump right up against the color we just put in. Still alternating my marks, keeping my strokes very free. You can see that I'm overlapping the contour of the clouds. I want to do that so I don't end up with a gap in between both colors. Once this is in, I'll go ahead and focus on blending. Light touch and just graze in between both colors to get a nice soft blend. Something like that. And from there, you can add in any subtle color changes. So if you feel like some areas need more white, you can go ahead and put in a little bit more white on top. Remember to press lightly with the brush so that the color sits upon the surface without mixing too much. I have more white up here, getting these different accents popping in through the sky. A little more white here, and just blend that in. Okay, so that's pretty good for this section of the sky. Now moving down to the clouds, we have more of a deep grayish purple for the base color of the sky, or the clouds. So to mix that, what we're going to use is Ultramarine Blue, Alizarin Crimson. It's more of a blue-violet, so in terms of the ratio, I have a little more Ultramarine Blue than Crimson, and then a touch of white. To knock down the saturation of the color, I'm going to add in a little bit of cadmium yellow. Remember, yellow is the opposite of purple, so it's going to help to gray down that color a little bit, not make it too bright. So I'll test this out. You can see it's a very deep grayed down purple. I'm going to have this cut through and fill in this bottom section. I'm not overtly concerned if some of this color gets mixed in, because sometimes that can work to your advantage, providing more of a harmony throughout the colors of the painting. This is a darker color, so the consistency is a little bit thinner than the color that's above it. And then remember, through here we have more of these brighter saturated colors. So I'm just gonna do more of a dry brush effect around this area. I don't have to cover it too much as it gets closer to the sun. So I leave this as kind of its own separate section. I want to blend the upper section of the clouds, so keeping this edge a little bit soft, just lightly grazing in between both colors and getting a softer edge. From there, I can begin focusing, just like we did on the sky, on any color or value changes. So for example, I see a little more white on the right side around here. So I just add in a touch of white, work it in, and blend. And you got that value change going on right there. So that gives us a pretty good start for this area. And then next thing we're going to do is let's move on down to the water before we get into the more vivid colors of the sun. Color is going to be pretty similar to this mixture. It's a little more bluish. So I'll still add a bit more blue to that ratio. That's that Alizarin Crimson Ultramarine Blue mixture. So just adjusting the ratio to a little bit more ultramarine blue. It's also going to be darker than that color of the cloud, so I want to pay attention to the value and make sure that it's slightly darker. And you can see they're a little bit darker. So that should be about right. Keeping this line straight going across. And again, I'm keeping this as its own area, so I don't really want to paint here. This is important with a sunset, at least if you're working on one straight section. You don't want to fill in this section as much, just so that you retain the vibrancy of these colors. So you can see I skip over and continue here. There's a lot of detail, textural detail that goes on in the surface of the water with the ripples. The way that I like to treat it is alternate some very dry brush marks like this, so I leave some space in between. And then that way I fill in most of the kind of the back color. And then when I get into the brighter colors of the sunlight, I'm going to go into these areas and fill in some of that space that's in between. And notice here that I left this as its own section again to make it easier. Just going to continue through here, making sure that I cover this whole area. Get this a little sharper on the edge. There we go. All right. Moving down to here, we have some breaks in between some waves. So what happens here is I get the same color cutting across here, very linear, and then a few more. So like another one here, and down here. And then these spaces are going to have more white filled in. Save that for later. Moving forward, I can go ahead and start filling in the foreground. So the color for this too will have some ultramarine blue. Looks like some yellow ochre. Ultramarine blue. Yellow ochre. And actually those two colors are pretty good for the base tone. Get a little more yellow ochre in my mix. This is one of those areas where I still want to make sure I mix enough of it because it covers up such a big space on the bottom of the canvas. So be sure to mix a pretty good pile of this. It's also much darker than the area above it, so I want to keep that in mind. There's probably going to be a touch of black mixed in here, so ultramarine blue, yellow ochre, and some black. I'll make sure it's a nice dark value. That's better, so something about there is what we're looking for. So this will be our base color. I want to fill in this area all through here. I know that I have a figure here, so keeping that in mind. Gets lighter towards the pathway, so I'm going to add more white when I get to that. But for now I just want to cut across here, use this same color to fill in this space. And so I have this line identified in the beginning. Reason for that is, just like with the water, we're going to have more of these orange tones appearing here. So I'm going to do the same technique that I did up here, where I do more of a dry brush effect. So you can see the ripples on the canvas showing through. I don't really want to cover it entirely. So I'm just going to have some of this greenish color showing up, while at the same time leaving some of this tone showing underneath, so that I can work over it easily with more of the oranges. The darker cluster of the foliage down here. So just fill this in with the same color. So we'll continue through here, combine together, and we'll get more subtlety later on with the details and color changes that we're seeing in this foreground area. And just cover the whole surface, fill up this little section. General technique with landscape painting is to get darker towards the front. Kind of acts as a lead-in for the viewer and contains the eye towards the center of the piece. You can see on the sky we did that same thing where it's darker on the top. With the foreground it'll be darker on the bottom. So we have the ground plane filled in for the pathway, I'm just going to take the same color, add in a little bit of white, very slight amount of white, to get a lighter version, and just fill in this area. Through here. So you can see slightly lighter than the color next to it. So we have that covered. And then finally for the figure in that area, just going to take black and plot it out through here, pressing lightly, still thinking about it as an abstract shape. Something like that is all we need right now. Alright, so that gives us our foreground. Now what we have left is the sunlight. So we want to start in the middle where the sun is directly and then work our way outwards. I'm going to switch brushes since I've been working with some of these darker colors. Using a slightly smaller flat brush, I'm going to just use some titanium white mixed with a touch of cadmium yellow. It's going to be about 90% titanium white, and just with a very small amount of cadmium yellow. Very important to keep the color clean, so I really want to make sure that it's just those two colors in the mix. I'll test it out. So the sun's about here, right above the water. Notice that the consistency of the paint is thicker. That's very important. I could even go a little bit more. So you see some of that mark making. And then working our way outwards, we're going to have the more saturated color around that central area. So that's where I'm going to use pretty much pure cadmium yellow. Going around this central, more highlighted area. And I'm also paying attention to just making sure this color stays clean. So I'm pressing very lightly with my brush. I'm working carefully around this central area to keep it bright. I don't want the color to mix too much with that center area. And then as I go outwards, I have this branch of light that kind of peeks through here in this line, going both ways. So you can see that, and then as the light travels outwards, it's going to get more orangey. So what we'll do there is use cadmium yellow with a touch of cadmium red to get more of a yellow-orange type of color. Still really making sure that it's a clean color. Adding the red in small amounts, because red can just easily swallow up any color. Okay, so let's add this in towards the outer section. It's a little more orangey. Light touch, especially as you go around the purple. I'm going to go underneath here. And then as it goes out, I can begin working it into this purple color and slowly blending. Light touch with my brush and melding these colors together. It's all about the pressure you apply with your brush. Just grazing. And as it travels out, it begins mixing with this purple until it fades off. Like that. I'm going to make sure that this continues down here. So I'll add more of this. Continue here. Blend a little bit on the outer edges of these lines. Just slight. Traveling down towards the water, the light will begin to ripple up into the surface of the water. So we're using this same yellow-orange color and beginning to fill in this area underneath the sun. So I'll start here, right directly below the sun. And you can see that my marks are horizontal in order to convey the surface texture of the water. And then as I work my way outwards, I'm going in between these marks that I've left and doing these short, varied marks in between the purple, blue-violet color that we've put down. I just want to do a slight blend on the outer edges, not too much, because to convey water you really want to keep the reflections kind of sharp. If you blend too much, it's going to flatten out a little bit. So with the blending, you just want to do a very, very slight blend. And it's all about variety, so try not to make your marks all the same. Don't overthink it. Do a little more blending here. Okay, and then towards the front here we got more white because this is the foam of the waves. It's still going to have some yellow though, so I can actually take what's on my brush with this color, add in some white, and get a lighter version of this color that cuts across this way. And we'll just fill this in all the way through. Don't have to blend too much on the edges there. Do the same thing down here. And towards the front, we get more of a combination of the purple and this yellowish color coming together. It's more of a, looks like a sandy area, kind of wet sand, so it's both of these colors melding into each other. I'll just kind of work this yellowish tone throughout this area, and then take my purple and work that in as well, very lightly. Just kind of blend it in to that yellow color. So here I have the beginning of that foreground area, and that's where we want to get a little more orangey tones cutting through. So that's what we're going to do next. Let's fill in the rest of this. So getting into this section, we want to wipe off the brush, go in with more of a pure orange, so a little more red mixed into my cadmium yellow. So cadmium yellow, cadmium red. And I'm going to begin filling in this area that I've left with the cadmium red and cadmium yellow mix. Add a little more red. There we go. It's a good base color. Still want it to be a little darker though, so what I'm going to do is I'll add a bit more red. And that darkens the value slightly. And I'm just going to fill in this area right on the border of the land area. Traveling through here. It's going to slowly fade as it goes towards the right. So you get some of the light showing up here. And then begin to work the color into the greenish area below it and blend. And I'm doing some choppy mark making to convey the texture of the ground plane. It's kind of a rough surface, so it doesn't have to be like a totally clean blend. You can show some of that mark making. Also want to break up the upper edge so that you can see I have more of a rough edge rather than a totally clean line. And that way we have the whole thing covered. So at this point what I'm going to do is start working on more of the value subtleties. I'll start with the orange, which we're going to have continuing in bits and pieces towards the bottom area. So I'm just going to have these color pops that occur here and there, leaving some space in between my mark making. So again, this is all about variety. Working it into the green, blending it just enough so that it ties in with that original color without getting rid of that more warm tone that I'm putting down. So slowly fading as it goes down. The majority of this mixture is now cadmium red, because that's going to allow this orange to show through in this darker area. And you can see how that gives you more of a subtle effect of light. I can also begin to get some more color subtlety on the darker, cooler tones that are occurring in the pathway and some of the foliage area that we see on the right. So here I'm going to see more of the sky type of color showing through in the pathway. I'm going to revisit the sky color. That's another reason why I mix a good amount of it, and I'm just going to apply some of it into this bottom area to get some lighter accents. And then as I add it in, I'm going to blend it and work it into the color or base color. So as I blend, it's going to get more nuanced, more subtle. Have a little bit more here. And some showing in the foliage with some more broken up marks. I can begin also focusing on more of the lighter values that are appearing towards the sky area, on the clouds, and even on the water. So I'm going to take some of the sky color, this one here, and lightly apply it towards the bottom of the cloud around this area. So pressing lightly and working it in. And what this will do is add more subtlety and more color uniformity with the top. The important thing is to really just add in a small amount and then blend it. So I've added in orange on both sides, and I can take some of the residue that's on my brush from blending this area, and I can apply some more subtle clouds in the upper section of the sky about here, cutting across and just lightly blending around the edges here. And there's one here as well. Soft blend. So light touch. Something like that. One more here. More linear. So you can see that variety where I have a thinner mark right here, thicker one here, and then something in between on the left. Could even add one right about here. Working in some of the residue that's on my brush down here as well into the pathway a bit more, just so that we have more of that relationship from the top colors to the bottom, and provides more of a color harmony going on. A few more bluish toned strokes towards the left area to add more uniformity, as well as a few more here. So that's some of that sky color showing up again in some of these darker patches. And then at this point I can begin a little more specification on the figure, but really doesn't need much. It's more of a silhouette, so as long as I have a pretty accurate shape, that's pretty much what I need. And then you can go in with a small detail brush, like a number 2 round brush. And then you can take some of the orange and just do a very subtle accent of light along the left side of the figure. Something like that. So it ties in with the glow of the sun. And then just kind of chisel around the edges, make any necessary adjustments here and there. But again, you're not really aiming for a lot of detail on this. Just something like that is fine. At this point, really, only thing left that I would add in is maybe a few darker color accents towards the bottom. So taking a smaller brush, or a detail brush, I can go in with Ivory Black and add in just a few darker value accents, varying my mark making and pressing lightly so that this darker value sits on top of this wet layer. So particularly towards that bottom right corner, we're going to have these darker accents. A little bit on the pathway. And then as it goes to the left, it's going to get dimmer and dimmer until it fades off. So less mark making and lighter. I begin to blend it more as it goes to the left. So at this point, looks pretty good. You could, of course, continue adding more detail, more color nuances here and there. But for the most part, you could leave the painting at this stage and pretty much call it finished. Just adjusting this minor area here for the edge. Oh, looks good. So hopefully this shows you some of the key things to look for when painting a sunset scene. Really the most important thing I would say to pay attention to is to capture the sense of light. And the way that you would do that is by keeping this as its own section when you're blocking in all your colors. So you work around this area, keep it as is, and then fill in the rest. After you've blocked in the colors around it, then you can go in with the brightest section first, titanium white with some cadmium yellow in this case. And then as I go branching out, you get more of the saturated color with the cadmium yellow, followed up by cadmium yellow with some cadmium red for the more orangey tones. And that will continue to get more reddish as you go to the further end of the color. So right around here you have more cadmium red, which fades into the darker tones on the bottom of the canvas. The other thing that you want to take note of is establishing color harmony. So I'm constantly reusing colors wherever I can. I take some of the sky color, mix it in down here. I can take some of the orange, mix it into the cloud. So finding ways to incorporate these colors in different parts of the painting will really help you to not only simplify your palette, but also just provide more of a color harmony throughout the entire piece. So I hope you found this informative. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and I'm certainly happy to answer any further questions regarding landscape painting, painting a sunset, or questions in general about the painting process. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.